I live in a city that never sleeps, in an apartment that I bought with my own 2 hands, working in a field most people find painfully dull. I'm a chief compliance officer, or at least, I was. My job was to be the conscience of a corporation, the person who reads the fine print and says no when ambition gets too greedy. I thought I was building a fortress of ethics, but it turns out I was just decorating a house of cards right before the CEO decided to light a match. This is the story of how my career was incinerated by a single text message in the middle of the company's biggest night, and how I used the ashes to burn down their entire $38 million empire. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The Centennial Gala was the shiniest jewel in the corporate crown of Innovate Dynamics. Held in the city's most prestigious ballroom, a cavernous space known as the Crystal Atrium, it was an event built on the pretense of celebration but engineered for the sole purpose of projecting power. The theme this year, according to the embossed invitations that had cost more than my first car, was a future forged in light. Everything was glass, crystal, and shimmering silver. Waiters moved like ghosts with trays of champagne that caught the light from a dozen chandeliers, each one the size of a small vehicle. The air hummed with a symphony of polite laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the low thrum of a string quartet playing something modern and forgettable. It was a monument to success, and as the chief compliance officer, I knew I had built the foundation that made it all possible. For 5 years, I had been the bedrock of Innovate Dynamics. When our CEO, David Miller, had a wild idea for a merger that bordered on monopolistic, I was the one who structured it to pass regulatory scrutiny. When our ambitious head of sales, a position now held by the ruthlessly efficient Jessica Finch, wanted to use customer data in a way that danced on the edge of privacy laws, I was the one who drew the line in the sand and forced them to find an ethical alternative. My job wasn't to make friends, it was to protect the company from itself. It was a thankless, exhausting role, but I was good at it. I believed in it. I saw compliance not as a set of rules, but as the architecture of corporate integrity. Without it, a company wasn't an innovator, it was just a predator in a nicer suit. David Miller, our charismatic and perpetually tanned CEO, was holding court near the towering ice sculpture of our company logo. At 48, he had the energy of a man half his age and the moral compass of a shark. He thrived on risk, on disruption, a word he used to justify any reckless move that promised a spike in our stock price. He'd clap me on the back in board meetings and call me his guardian angel, a nickname I despised. It was condescending, a way to frame my meticulous, legally vital work as something ethereal and ultimately optional. He didn't see me as a strategist, he saw me as a safety net, and every acrobat eventually gets tired of the net. Tonight, he was particularly radiant, his teeth impossibly white against his California tan. He was flanked by Jessica Finch, the VP of Operations. Jessica was 35, sharp as a shard of glass and twice as cold. She had clawed her way up the ladder with a combination of genuine intelligence and a terrifying willingness to throw anyone under the bus if it meant getting ahead. She and I had a professionally frosty relationship. She saw my department as a roadblock, a sales prevention unit, and I saw her methods as a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. We smiled at each other at events like this, our eyes holding a silent, mutual contempt. "Reagan, there you are," David boomed, his voice cutting through the polite murmur as I approached. He draped an arm around my shoulder, the scent of expensive cologne and single malt scotch enveloping me. "Isn't this incredible? A testament to what we've built." "It's a beautiful event, David," I said, my voice even. I gave a tight, professional nod to Jessica, who was wearing a silver dress that made her look like a beautiful, deadly weapon. "Beautiful? It's a declaration," he said, gesturing wildly with his champagne flute. "We're not just in the game anymore, Reagan. We are the game. And you," he squeezed my shoulder, "you keep us on the board." Jessica offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. Reagan's reports are certainly thorough." I was just telling David how much paper we could save if we streamlined some of those pesky regulations. Her jab was obvious, a tired old line she used whenever she felt her projects were being scrutinized too closely. Normally, I would have a sharp but professional retort ready, something about the cost of paper versus the cost of federal fines. But tonight, I just felt weary. The last 6 months had been a relentless battle over a single acquisition, a deal codenamed Project Nightingale. It was a European tech firm we had absorbed, and the entire process had been a compliance nightmare. Their books were a mess, their data privacy standards were archaic, and their intellectual property claims were dubious at best. I had flagged it, repeatedly, in memos, in meetings, in reports so detailed they could sedate a horse. I had advised against the acquisition, then, when David pushed it through anyway, I had created a painstaking, multi-million-dollar plan to bring Nightingale up to code. The cost of compliance is always less than the cost of failure, Jessica, I said, my tone flat. David laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. Always the guardian angel. That's why we love her. Now, no shop talk tonight. This is a night for celebration. For the future. He raised his glass, and Jessica mirrored the gesture, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite decipher. It looked like victory. I chalked it up to the successful quarter we'd just closed, a success built largely on the inflated, unstable revenue from the Nightingale acquisition. A success I knew was a ticking time bomb. I excused myself and moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with people I'd spent countless hours arguing with in conference rooms. I saw Ben Carter, a senior specialist from our IT security division, lingering near the dessert table. Ben was one of the few people outside my department I considered a work friend. He was quiet, brilliant, and saw the digital guts of the company more clearly than anyone. Enjoying the spectacle, he asked, popping a miniature cheesecake into his mouth. I'm enduring it, I admitted with a small smile. Trying not to calculate the cost of this ice sculpture in man-hours. Ben chuckled. Don't. You'll give yourself an aneurysm. I'm just trying to avoid Jessica Finch. I swear she thinks encryption is a brand of perfume. She asked me last week if we could just turn off the firewall for a bit to make a new client portal run faster. We shared a look of mutual understanding. We were the infrastructure, the ones who knew how fragile it all was. We were the plumbers and electricians in a crystal palace, and we knew that a single cracked pipe could bring the whole thing down. She got her way on that portal, by the way, Ben said, his voice dropping. Went over my head, straight to David. Said my security protocols were stifling innovation. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was the pattern. David, enamored with people like Jessica who promised fast, easy growth, was increasingly viewing caution and procedure as weakness. He was a pilot who thought altitude sickness was a myth, flying higher and higher without checking the oxygen levels. The evening wore on. Speeches were made. David took the stage and delivered a rousing, cliché-ridden monologue about vision and synergy and climbing mountains. He thanked the board, the investors, and his incredible leadership team. He even gave me a nod, thanking me for keeping them all honest, which drew a smattering of polite, knowing laughter from the executive tables. It felt like being praised for being the designated driver at a wild party. Necessary, but ultimately, a buzzkill. As the string quartet was replaced by a live band playing bland, inoffensive pop covers, I decided I had fulfilled my social obligations. The air was thick with fake smiles and the cloying scent of success. I felt a profound sense of alienation, as if I was watching the company through a thick pane of glass. I was there, I was integral, but I was not one of them. My purpose was to be the voice of caution in a room full of people who only wanted to hear the word yes. I found a quiet alcove overlooking the city skyline, the lights of 1,000 other ambitions twinkling in the darkness. I pulled out my phone to order a car, my reflection a faint, serious ghost in the polished glass of the window. And that's when my phone buzzed. Not a call, but a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, the company's automated HR notification system. The system used for server maintenance alerts and office closures. I almost dismissed it as spam. But something made me open it. The message was brutally, inhumanly concise. It was a single sentence, stripped of all courtesy, all humanity, all recognition of my 5 years of service. It was a digital guillotine. The message on my screen was stark and clinical, composed with the impersonal efficiency of a machine. It read, "Your employment with Innovate Dynamics has been terminated, effective immediately. Your access to company systems has been revoked. An exit package will be couriered to you within 7 business days." I read it once. Then a second time. The words seemed to float, refusing to assemble into a coherent thought. Terminated. Revoked. Immediately. The music from the ballroom behind me, a cheerful rendition of some top 40 hit, suddenly sounded mocking and grotesque. The clinking of glasses, the laughter, it was all the soundtrack to my professional execution. A profound, ringing silence filled my ears, blocking out everything else. My blood ran cold, a glacial shock that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. I looked up from my phone, my eyes scanning the grand ballroom. Everything was the same. The chandeliers still glittered. The waiters still circulated. David was laughing, throwing his head back in a show of pure, unadulterated joy as some investor told him a story. Jessica was standing beside him, a proprietary hand on his arm, her lips curved into a triumphant smirk. And in that instant, looking at them, I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some HR glitch. This was a coordinated, deliberate act. And it was done here, now, in the most public and humiliating way possible, to send a message. The guardian angel had been cast out. My first instinct was denial, a desperate scrabbling for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. A typo in the employee ID number. I tried to log into my work email on my phone. Access denied. My company messaging app. User not found. My access to the shared drive where I kept every file, every report, every piece of evidence of my diligence. You do not have permission to access this resource. It was true. I had been digitally erased. In the space of 30 seconds, 5 years of my life, my career, had been wiped clean with a few keystrokes. My second instinct was to confront him. To march across that polished floor, through the sea of smiling colleagues who were now former colleagues, and demand an explanation. To ask David how he could do this, how he could toast my name on stage and then discard me like a piece of trash minutes later. But what would that accomplish? He would feign surprise, or worse, he would look at me with cold, pitying eyes and have security escort me out. Jessica's smirk would widen. I would be a scene, a piece of gossip for them to chew on for the rest of the night. Did you hear about Reagan? Made a complete fool of herself. No. I would not give them that satisfaction. My composure, the very thing I was paid so handsomely for, became my shield. I took a slow, deep breath, my lungs feeling tight and brittle. I smoothed down my dress, straightened my shoulders, and composed my face into a mask of serene neutrality. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but on the outside, I was calm. I was a statue. I needed to leave. Now. But I had to walk through the entire ballroom to get to the exit. It felt like the longest walk of my life, a gauntlet of ghosts. People smiled and nodded as I passed. The head of marketing asked if I was enjoying the evening. I heard myself reply, my voice sounding distant and strange, very much so. It's an unforgettable night. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. Every step was a battle against the tremor in my legs. I kept my eyes fixed on the grand, ornate doors at the far end of the room, the gateway to my new, uncertain reality. As I neared the exit, I passed the executive table where David and Jessica were now seated with some board members. David caught my eye. He didn't look away. He didn't have the decency to look guilty. He simply gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of acknowledgement or farewell. It was a nod of dismissal. A final confirmation. Yes, it was me. Now go. It was the coldest, most contemptuous gesture I had ever received. In his eyes, I saw the chilling reality. I was no longer a person to him. I was just a problem that had been solved. I walked out of the crystal atrium and into the cool night air. The city sounds, the traffic, the distant sirens, rushed in to fill the ringing silence in my head. I didn't wait for the valet. I just started walking, my heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the pavement. I walked for blocks, oblivious to where I was going, the glittering, celebratory lights of the city blurring through the hot tears that finally began to fall. Humiliation is a unique kind of pain. It's a violation of your dignity, a public stripping away of your worth. To be fired is one thing. To be fired by an automated text message, while your boss and colleagues celebrate the success you helped build, is a profound and calculated act of cruelty. It was designed to break me, to make me feel small and powerless. It was a message to everyone else in the company: loyalty is worthless. Dissent is a death sentence. When I finally made it back to my apartment, the silence was deafening. The space I had been so proud of, a symbol of my independence and success, now felt like a cage. I tossed my keys on the counter and my clutch clattered to the floor, spilling its contents. My phone lay face up, the screen dark. For a moment, I just stared at it, this small rectangle of glass and metal that had detonated my life. The shock began to recede, replaced by a slow, creeping burn. It wasn't sadness. It was anger. A white-hot, clarifying rage. They hadn't just fired me. They had tried to erase me. They thought I would just disappear, another casualty of corporate ambition, too ashamed and broken to fight back. They thought I was just a guardian angel, a passive protector. They had forgotten that even angels from mythologies had another side. They were also messengers, and sometimes they were avengers. I sat on my couch in my gala dress, the city lights twinkling through my window, and I let the anger wash over me. They had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated me. And they had left me with nothing to lose. But they had forgotten what I still had, my memory. I knew every skeleton in Innovate Dynamics' closet. I had buried them myself, under layers of legal jargon and carefully worded compliance reports. And I knew exactly which one was buried the shallowest. Project Nightingale. The $38 million acquisition that was a monument to David's ego and a masterpiece of fraudulent accounting. It was his greatest triumph. And I was about to make it his tombstone. The first 24 hours were a blur of numb disbelief and fiery rage. I woke up on the couch, still in my rumpled evening gown, the morning light feeling like an intrusion. My personal laptop sat on the coffee table, a portal to a world I was no longer a part of. Out of pure, masochistic habit, I tried to access the company's public investor relations page. It was already updated. My name, Reagan, Chief Compliance Officer, had been scrubbed from the leadership page. It was as if I had never existed. In my place, under a newly created title, Chief Operating and Integrity Officer, was a smiling, professionally photographed picture of Jessica Finch. They hadn't even waited a full day. The betrayal was so swift, so complete, it was almost impressive in its audacity. The exit package arrived that afternoon, delivered by a grim-faced courier who wouldn't make eye contact. It was a thick, insulting manila envelope. Inside was a standard severance agreement, 2 months' pay in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement so restrictive I wouldn't be able to say the company's name in a job interview without breaching it. It was corporate blackmail, plain and simple. Sign this, take the hush money, and disappear quietly. Or get nothing. They were counting on my fear, on my desperation to pay my mortgage, to silence me. I threw the documents on my dining table and laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. 2 months' pay? After 5 years of saving them tens of millions in potential fines, of working weekends to clean up their legal messes, of ensuring the very foundation of the company was stable enough for them to build their glass palace on? It was the ultimate insult. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me gone cheap. It was this insult, this final, arrogant dismissal of my worth, that finally cleared the fog from my mind. The grief and humiliation receded, and what was left was pure, unadulterated focus. My mind, trained for years to find loopholes, to identify risk, to see the weakness in any system, turned away from my own situation and towards innovate dynamics. I was no longer their chief compliance officer. I was now their single greatest liability. And they had no idea. I began to work, not with anger, but with the cold, methodical precision they had once paid me for. I didn't need their servers. I didn't need their files. I had the most important asset, my memory of the last 6 months, a period I now called the Nightingale era. Project Nightingale. It was David's passion project. A mid-sized European data analytics firm that he claimed had a revolutionary AI algorithm. He saw it as our ticket into the European market and a massive technological leap forward. He paid $38 million for it, a figure that had made the board blanch but which he had pushed through with his typical charismatic force of will. He had sold it to them as a bargain. I was brought in to lead the compliance due diligence, and what I found was a disaster. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the memories surface. I was back in the sterile, windowless data room, sifting through thousands of pages of documents. The first red flag: Nightingale's accounting practices. They recognized revenue the moment a client signed a letter of intent, not when the cash was actually received or the service rendered. This was aggressive, borderline fraudulent, and it artificially inflated their growth figures by at least 40%. I remembered the exact report I wrote, the heading in bold red letters: aggressive and non-standard revenue recognition practices, high financial risk. Second red flag: data privacy. Nightingale operated under old, lax European privacy laws. With the new, much stricter GDPR regulations in effect, their entire database of customer information, their core asset, was a toxic wasteland of legal liability. The cost to bring them into compliance would be enormous, involving scrubbing data, re-establishing user consent, and a complete overhaul of their infrastructure. I had commissioned an external audit. The projected cost was $5 million, with a potential fine for past non-compliance reaching upwards of $10 million. I remembered the meeting where I presented this to David and Jessica. Jessica had scoffed. "It's a bureaucratic nightmare, Reagan. We can deal with the GDPR thing after the acquisition. We'll just have our tech guys build a patch." I remembered my response, my voice tight with frustration. "It's not a thing, Jessica. It's the law. A patch won't work. We are talking about a fundamental flaw in their business model. If we acquire them as is, we acquire their liability. We could be fined up to 4% of Innovate Dynamics' global annual revenue." David had waved his hand dismissively, that charming, infuriating gesture he used to shut down any inconvenient conversation. "Reagan, you're paid to worry. I'm paid to win. We're not letting some European paperwork stand in the way of a game-changing acquisition. Bury the audit. We'll handle it internally. Keep it out of the final report to the board. Bury the audit." An explicit instruction to conceal a material risk from the board of directors. It was the moment I should have resigned. But I didn't. Instead, I fought. I documented everything. I sent a follow-up memo, CCing the General Counsel, stating my official recommendation against the acquisition until these issues were resolved. I made sure my dissent was in writing, a permanent part of the record. Or so I thought. By firing me and locking me out, they thought they had locked away that record. The biggest red flag of all, the one that I knew was their Achilles heel, was the matter of Nightingale's core intellectual property. Their revolutionary AI was a sham. Our own internal tech experts, in a preliminary review I insisted upon, found that the algorithm was incredibly unstable and largely built upon open-source code that Nightingale had no exclusive license to. They had dressed up a freely available engine, passed it off as proprietary tech, and David had bought it hook, line, and sinker. The $38 million wasn't for a revolutionary AI, it was for a mountain of bad data, legal liabilities, and stolen code. We hadn't bought a golden goose, we'd bought a ticking bomb. I had presented this finding to David in his office, just the two of us. He had listened, his face impassive. When I was done, he stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the city. "You're a good compliance officer, Reagan," he'd said, his back to me. "Very thorough. But you lack vision. You see risk, I see opportunity. This is happening. Your job now is to make sure the paperwork is clean. Frame this as a strategic asset acquisition. Emphasize the potential, downplay the challenges. We're all on the same team here." It wasn't a request. It was an order. An order to help him mislead the board and the shareholders. I had refused. I told him I would not sign off on any report that misrepresented the facts. The meeting ended coldly. A week later, he announced the deal was done. He must have found another way, another lawyer or consultant willing to sign off on the doctored reports. And he marked me as an obstacle to be removed. My firing wasn't just about silencing me, it was about clearing the path for his deception. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding with a cold, clear purpose. He thought he had buried the truth. But he had made one fatal error. He had fired the one person who knew the exact location of every single body. He had shown me his greatest weakness, Project Nightingale. It was a $38 million lie. And lies, when exposed to the right light, have a tendency to shatter everything around them. I walked over to the dining table and picked up the severance agreement. I tore it in half, then in half again, the sound of ripping paper a satisfying declaration of war. They wanted me to disappear for 2 months' pay. I was about to cost them everything. My apartment transformed from a place of sanctuary into a war room. The dining table, once home to takeout containers and unopened mail, was now covered in neat stacks of paper, a large whiteboard propped against the wall, and my personal laptop, now my sole weapon. My first move was to hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most feared employment and whistleblower attorney in the city, a woman named Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was in her late 50s, with a razor-sharp mind and a reputation for making arrogant CEOs weep during depositions. When I laid out the basics of my case in her office, the text message termination, the timing, and the words Project Nightingale, her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. They fired their chief compliance officer by text message right after she refused to sign off on a fraudulent acquisition? Evelyn said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Reagan, this isn't just a wrongful termination suit. This is a corporate implosion waiting for a lit match. And you, my dear, are holding a flamethrower." Evelyn's strategy was twofold. First, we'd pursue the wrongful termination claim to put immediate pressure on the company. But the real weapon, the flamethrower, was the whistleblower angle. If we could prove that Innovate Dynamics, under David's leadership, had knowingly misled its investors and the board about the value and legality of the Nightingale acquisition, we could bring the full weight of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, down on them. That was the path to real justice. And for that, I needed irrefutable proof. My memories were a map, but I needed the treasure, the documents, the emails, the reports I knew existed on the company's servers. This was where my plan became delicate. I couldn't hack into their systems, that would be illegal and would torpedo my own case. I needed a way in, a legal loophole. And that led me to the one person I hoped was still an ally, Ben Carter, the IT security specialist. Contacting him was risky. He was still an employee. If the company found out he was helping me, he'd be fired instantly. I didn't use my phone or email. I went old school. I wrote a simple, unsigned note that said, "Coffee at the Daily Grind? Thursday, 3 p.m. Your old friend from the 12th floor," and paid a local courier to drop it on his desk. The Daily Grind was a rundown coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, a place no self-respecting Innovate Dynamics executive would ever set foot in. It was perfect. I arrived early on Thursday, taking a small booth in the back. At precisely 3:05 p.m., Ben slid into the seat opposite me. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Reagan, this is crazy," he whispered, his hands fidgeting with a sugar packet. "They're on a witch hunt over there. Wiping your existence from every system. IT was ordered to perform a deep scrub of your files. They're trying to make it look like you were never there." "I know, Ben," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. "That's why I need your help. I'm not asking you to steal anything or break any rules. I'm an IT guy, not a magician. What can I possibly do?" "You're a security specialist," I corrected him gently. "You know the architecture better than anyone. You know its flaws. I need to know about the data retention policies. Specifically, the decommissioned server protocols." Ben's eyes widened slightly. He knew exactly what I was asking about. When a company upgrades its servers, the old ones are supposed to be professionally wiped and destroyed. But in large corporations, this process is often slow, expensive, and imperfect. Old backup servers are sometimes taken offline but not immediately wiped, left sitting in a dusty rack in a forgotten corner of the data center. "There was a server upgrade 6 months ago," Ben said, his voice barely audible. "Server farm B12. It contains the primary backups from last year up until the end of the second quarter. That includes all the initial due diligence on Nightingale. Officially, it was scheduled for sanitation last month. But the budget got reallocated by Jessica's department to fund a new synergy-focused marketing initiative. So, the server is still there. Offline, but intact." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The digital ghost. The archive of their sins, sitting in the dark, waiting. "Is there any way to access it?" I asked. "Not for me, not without setting off every alarm in the system," he said, shaking his head. "But for a lawyer with a subpoena? In a legal discovery process for a wrongful termination case, your attorney could specifically request all digital and physical backups stored at the B12 server farm from the specified time period. They'd have to comply. They'd probably fight it, claim it's an undue burden, but if the request is specific enough, a judge would grant it. They're counting on no one ever knowing to ask for it." He was brilliant. He hadn't given me access. He hadn't broken a single rule. He had simply given me a piece of information. He had told me the precise question to ask in a court of law. "Ben, why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. "You're risking everything." He looked down at the table, shredding the sugar packet into a small pile of white dust. "Because you were right," he said. "About Jessica's portal. About the security risks. David and Jessica are running the company on pure arrogance. They fired the best security engineer we had last month because he called Jessica's new client portal a data breach waiting to happen. They're reckless. And you were the only one who ever listened to us, the people in the trenches. This isn't Innovate Dynamics anymore. It's David's personal kingdom. And kings who think they're gods have a tendency to fall." We left separately. The next day, Evelyn Reed filed my wrongful termination lawsuit. As expected, Innovate Dynamics' high-priced corporate lawyers responded with a motion to dismiss, calling my claim frivolous and the baseless complaint of a disgruntled former employee. And then Evelyn filed our first discovery request. It was a work of art, a surgical strike. Buried amongst dozens of standard requests for emails and personnel files was the key. We request a full, unadulterated, forensically sound image of all data contained on the decommissioned backup servers located in server farm B12, specifically covering the period of January 1st to July 31st. The company's legal team went into a panic. They filed motion after motion to block the request, calling it overly broad, burdensome, and irrelevant. They were tipping their hand. Their panic told us everything we needed to know. They were terrified of what was on that server. The judge, an old-school jurist with no patience for corporate stonewalling, was not impressed. After a heated hearing, she looked down at the company's lawyers over her spectacles and said, "It seems to me that if the data is as irrelevant as you claim, you wouldn't be fighting so hard to hide it." Motion to compel granted. You have 10 days. It was a monumental victory. We had breached the fortress. The sword was forged. Now, it was time to sharpen it. When the forensic image of the server arrived at Evelyn's office on a locked hard drive, we knew we had them. It was just a matter of finding the exact email, the exact memo, the exact buried report that would serve as the killing blow. The hunt began. The hard drive from server B12 was a digital time capsule, a perfectly preserved record of the company's state of mind before David's paranoia led him to start scrubbing the records. Evelyn hired a team of forensic analysts, and for 2 weeks, her office became my second home. We waded through a sea of data, terabytes of emails, chat logs, draft documents, and metadata. It was painstaking work, but with every passing day, the noose around David and Jessica grew tighter. We found everything. We found the first draft of the external audit on Nightingale's data privacy, the one that projected a $5 million compliance cost and a potential $10 million fine. We found the email chain where I forwarded it to David, and his one-line response, "Let's not circulate this widely. Keep it contained." Then we found a subsequent email from David to Jessica, with the subject line Nightingale Optics, where he wrote, "Reagan's being overly dramatic about the GDPR issue. Let's get a new, more business-friendly assessment from a different consultant. Someone who understands the big picture." They had commissioned a second, watered-down report and presented that one to the board, completely omitting the first one. That was securities fraud. We found the internal tech review of Nightingale's revolutionary AI, which concluded it was unstable, non-proprietary, and built on unlicensed open-source code. We cross-referenced the metadata. This report was created on May 10. David announced the acquisition to the board on May 12, calling the AI a priceless, proprietary asset. He had known the truth. He had lied directly to his board. The crown jewel, however, was a chat log from the company's internal messaging system between David and Jessica, dated 2 days before the gala. It was a conversation I was never meant to see, a conversation that laid their entire plan bare. "Jessica, board meeting tomorrow to finalize the Nightingale integration budget. Reagan is still flagging the IP and data issues. She wants to present her findings. David, she won't be there. I'm tired of her negativity. She's a roadblock to progress. We need someone in that role who facilitates, not obstructs. Jessica, so what's the plan? We can't just ignore her report. David, we're not going to. We're going to make her disappear. HR is processing her termination package. We'll announce your promotion to Chief Operating and Integrity Officer on Monday. You can present a revised, more optimistic summary of the situation. Jessica, what if she makes a scene? Sues us? David, let her. We'll bury her in legal fees. She's one person. We're Innovate Dynamics. By the time it's over, no one will hire her again. We'll make it clean. Effective end of day Friday. Jessica, the gala is Friday. That's cold, David. David, it's not cold. It's efficient. It sends a message. Evelyn read the chat log and let out a low whistle. This is it, she said, her voice filled with a quiet, lethal excitement. This is the smoking gun, the signed confession, and the blueprint all in one. They didn't just fire you for doing your job, Reagan. They conspired to commit fraud and fired you as part of the cover-up. This goes beyond wrongful termination. We have them on conspiracy, securities fraud, and retaliation against a whistleblower. With this evidence, our plan evolved. A private lawsuit was no longer enough. David and Jessica hadn't just wronged me, they had defrauded every shareholder, every employee, and every board member of Innovate Dynamics. The justice needed to be as public as my humiliation. We began to assemble what Evelyn called the Doomsday Package. It was a meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and indexed collection of our findings. It contained every incriminating email, every buried report, and the damning chat log, all presented in a clear, undeniable timeline of deceit. We prepared two versions. The first was for the SEC. Evelyn had contacts in their whistleblower office. We would bypass the lower-level bureaucracy and put this directly into the hands of the Enforcement Division. The evidence was so overwhelming, they would have no choice but to open a formal investigation immediately. This would trigger public disclosures, and the company's stock price would be the first casualty. The second package was for a specific member of the Innovate Dynamics board, a man named Arthur Kensington. Kensington was the old guard, a respected figure in the finance world who had been on the board since the company's founding. He was known for his staunch commitment to ethics and corporate governance. He had been skeptical of the Nightingale acquisition from the start, but had ultimately trusted David's presentation of the facts. We knew that if he saw undeniable proof that David had lied to him and exposed the company to catastrophic risk, he would act. He was our inside man, the first domino we needed to push. The SEC filing will be the cannon, Evelyn explained as we finalized the packages. But the letter to Kensington is the dagger. The government moves slowly, but a terrified board of directors moves at the speed of light. We send them simultaneously. The SEC will freeze their assets and start asking questions publicly, while Kensington sets the boardroom on fire from the inside. Preparing the packages felt like assembling a bomb. Every piece of paper, every highlighted sentence, was a component of the device that would shatter David Miller's world. There was no joy in it, only a grim, steely sense of purpose. This was not just revenge for my own humiliation. This was about holding power accountable. It was about the principle that I had built my entire career on: the truth is not a roadblock to progress. It is the only sustainable path forward. 1 week before the company's quarterly earnings call, we launched our attack. Evelyn formally submitted the whistleblower complaint to the SEC. At the exact same moment, a legal courier delivered the second doomsday package to Arthur Kensington's private office, marked strictly confidential and urgent. The first domino had been pushed. All we could do now was wait for the chain reaction. It didn't take long. Less than 6 hours after the package was delivered, Evelyn received a call. It was from Kensington's personal attorney. He wanted to arrange a meeting. An emergency board meeting had been called for the following morning. And they wanted me to be there. The Innovate Dynamics boardroom was on the top floor, a glass-walled sanctuary with a panoramic view of the city. It was a room designed to make people feel powerful, but as I walked in, the atmosphere was thick with fear and betrayal. The long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by the company's board members, their faces a mixture of stone-faced anger and anxious confusion. At the head of the table sat Arthur Kensington, his expression grim. He held a bound copy of our doomsday package in front of him as if it were a sacred text. At the opposite end of the table sat David Miller and Jessica Finch. The color had drained from David's perpetual tan, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly yellow. Jessica's usual icy composure was fractured, a subtle, frantic tension radiated from her. They looked like defendants in a trial that had already reached its verdict. They had been ambushed. Kensington had called the meeting without telling them the agenda, and they had walked into their own execution. Evelyn and I took our seats directly opposite them. The silence was heavy, broken only by the quiet shuffle of papers. Kensington cleared his throat. "David," he began, his voice low and laced with steel, this board has been presented with a series of disturbing allegations, supported by what appears to be extensive and verifiable evidence. Allegations that you, as CEO, knowingly misled this board, concealed material risks, and approved a $38 million acquisition based on fraudulent information. David sputtered, trying to regain his footing. Arthur, this is an ambush. This is nothing but the sour grapes of a disgruntled employee we had to let go for performance issues. Reagan's claims are baseless, and frankly, I'm insulted that this board would entertain such slander. Performance issues? Kensington retorted, his voice rising. He slid a document across the table. It was my last performance review, signed by David himself 3 months prior. It was filled with phrases like exemplary, unwavering commitment to integrity, and an invaluable asset to the company. This doesn't read like the review of a poor performer, David. Jessica jumped in, her voice sharp. Her performance declined rapidly after that. She became an obstructionist, unable to adapt to the company's evolving strategic needs. The evolving need to commit securities fraud, you mean? Evelyn interjected calmly, her voice cutting through the tension. We have the emails, Ms. Finch. We have the chat logs. We have the buried audit. We have the report from your own tech division stating the Nightingale AI was worthless. Shall I read them aloud? David's face contorted with rage. This is illegal. She stole company property. On the contrary, Evelyn replied smoothly. All of this evidence was obtained through legal discovery from a company server you failed to properly sanitize. An oversight, I'm sure. Your attorneys fought tooth and nail to hide it, but the court disagreed. Everything we have is admissible. Kensington turned his cold gaze back to David. The documents suggest you were made aware of a potential $15 million liability in privacy fines and compliance costs for Project Nightingale. Yet the report you presented to this board estimated those costs at under $500,000. Can you explain that discrepancy? That was a preliminary estimate. David blustered. Reagan's numbers were inflated, pure fear-mongering. So the external audit we have here, from a top-tier cybersecurity firm, is also fear-mongering? Kensington pressed, tapping the report. An audit you explicitly ordered to be buried? Every denial David offered was met with a document. Every lie was exposed by a time-stamped piece of evidence. I remained silent, letting the proof speak for itself. I watched the faces of the other board members shift from skepticism to shock, and finally, to cold fury. They were not just angry about the deception, they were terrified. They were investors, and David's actions had put their personal wealth and reputations at catastrophic risk. The final, devastating blow came when Kensington turned to the chat log. He didn't read it aloud. He simply pushed copies of the transcript down the table to each board member. I watched them read it, their eyes widening, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The raw, naked conspiracy laid out in David and Jessica's own words was undeniable. The phrases "make her disappear" and "sends a message" hung in the air like poison. When they were done, a new, funereal silence fell over the room. The fight was gone from David's eyes, replaced by the hollow look of utter defeat. Jessica stared at the table, her face a pale, frozen mask. Before this meeting, Kensington announced to the room, I was made aware that the SEC's Division of Enforcement has opened a formal investigation into Innovate Dynamics regarding the Nightingale acquisition. Trading of our stock was halted 30 minutes ago pending a company announcement. A collective gasp went through the room. It was over. The dominoes were not just falling, they were crashing down with spectacular force. Kensington looked directly at David and Jessica. The board has lost all confidence in your leadership. I am asking for your immediate resignations. If you do not provide them by the end of this meeting, the board will vote for your immediate termination for cause. There was no negotiation. There was no escape. David, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in an hour, slowly nodded. Jessica remained motionless, her entire world collapsing in on her. My part in the confrontation was done. I hadn't needed to shout or accuse. I had simply presented the truth they had tried so hard to bury. Evelyn and I stood up. Our lawsuit for wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation still stands, Evelyn stated clearly. We will be in touch. As we walked towards the door, I paused and looked back at David Miller one last time. He was just a man in an expensive suit, stripped of his power, his empire crumbling around him because of his own arrogance. He had tried to make me small, to humiliate me, to erase me. But in the end, the truth I had stood for was infinitely more powerful than the lies he had built. He hadn't just fired a compliance officer. He had armed his own executioner. We walked out of the boardroom, leaving them to the wreckage. The fallout from the boardroom reckoning was swift and brutal. The news broke the next morning in a devastating headline on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Innovate Dynamics CEO and COO resign amid SEC fraud investigation. Stock plummets. The story, fed by official company disclosures forced by the investigation, detailed the fraudulent accounting and misrepresentation behind the Nightingale acquisition. The $38 million deal was now being called a worthless asset. The stock, when it resumed trading, opened down 60%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization vanished in minutes. The glass palace had shattered. The company was forced to write down the entire value of the Nightingale acquisition, leading to a catastrophic quarterly loss. The SEC fines, when they were eventually levied, were even larger than we had anticipated, citing the deliberate and coordinated effort to mislead investors. The company was crippled, a shell of its former self, forced to sell off entire divisions just to stay afloat. The empire David had been so proud of was now little more than ashes. My lawsuit was settled out of court with breathtaking speed. The new interim board, led by Arthur Kensington, had no appetite for a public trial where even more of the company's dirty laundry would be aired. They knew we held all the cards. Evelyn negotiated a settlement that was staggering. It not only compensated me for my lost income but also included a significant sum for damages related to the public humiliation and the retaliation I had suffered. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of, a figure that ensured I would never have to worry about a mortgage or a bill again. But the true victory wasn't just the money. As a registered whistleblower with the SEC, I was also entitled to a percentage of the fines they collected from the company. That award, when it was finalized over a year later, was even larger than my settlement. The system I had once worked to uphold had, in the end, worked for me. As for the architects of the collapse, their fates were sealed. David Miller and Jessica Finch were named personally in the SEC complaint. They were barred from ever serving as officers or directors of a public company again and were hit with massive personal fines that wiped out most of their fortunes. I heard through the grapevine that David was facing potential criminal charges, his life reduced to endless meetings with lawyers. Jessica disappeared from the corporate world entirely. Their names became cautionary tales in business schools, symbols of hubris and corporate greed. Ben Carter, my ally in IT, resigned the week after the board meeting. He refused to work for the company that had been so thoroughly corrupted. The first major check I wrote after my settlement came through was to a headhunter, with instructions to find Ben and offer him a job. I didn't want to go back to the corporate world. The experience had left a permanent scar. I no longer believed in the idea of being the lone conscience inside a giant, amoral machine. So, I decided to build something new. I used a portion of my settlement to launch my own firm, Vance Compliance and Strategy. A consulting agency dedicated to helping companies build ethical foundations from the ground up, not as a reactive measure, but as a core business strategy. My first hire was Ben Carter, as my Chief Technology and Security Officer. Our first client was a promising tech startup whose young founder wanted to do things right from day one. We weren't just consultants, we became partners to companies that understood that integrity wasn't a cost center, but the most valuable asset they could ever have. My new office isn't on the top floor of a skyscraper. It's in a renovated brick building downtown, with large windows and an open floor plan. There's no mahogany table, just collaborative workspaces. We're building something real here, something I can believe in, brick by brick. Sometimes, when I'm working late, I'll look out the window at the city skyline, at the distant, glittering tower that houses what's left of Innovate Dynamics. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel triumph. I just feel a quiet sense of peace. They tried to break me, to humiliate me, to reduce my entire career to a single, cold text message. They thought power was about arrogance, about winning at all costs, about sending a message. They were right about one thing. They did send a message. They sent it to me, that night at the gala. And my response, a $38 million legal collapse, 2 ruined careers, a shattered company, and a new life built on my own terms, was my message back to them. The truth, when you try to bury it, doesn't die. It just waits. And when it finally comes out, it can burn down an entire empire.